Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being with us here tonight at 6 p.m. This is the Gentilly Resilience District project at Dealer Wetlands Resilience Design Review Committee meeting for the 90% design. So really quick before we start with this meeting and the information that we have to provide to the committee members and the designee and the members of the public that have joined us here tonight. We just wanted to go over some house rules. So as I stated before, this is a 90% Resilience Design Review Committee meeting. So please keep your computer or phone muted while the presentation is live. Do not unmute your audio unless you are speaking for the benefit of the group. So thank you for that. We will hold questions and go through them during the Q&A period following the presentation. So there are 3 ways to ask questions tonight. You can type the questions using the chat feature at any time. You can also speak. There will be an opportunity for callers to ask questions out loud, and you can also text the questions. You can text it to the number 504-517-5448. So again, that number is 504-517-5448. Also, please note that the meeting is being recorded and it will be available for public viewing at the webpage for the project. So you can see the link right here. In case you cannot see it, is www.nola.gov/resilience-grd-grd-projects-programs/dealer-wetlands/. So, and it should be up by next week. Really quick, let's go over the agenda for tonight and the speakers. My name is Lisbeth Pedroso. I'm the Resilience Service Specialist for the Gentilly Resilience District projects and programs. So we're gonna also have Rodrigo Medrano. She is the project manager. Then we will have, in a different order, but we're gonna have tonight Mary Kincaid. She's the project manager with the City of New Orleans. Then we're gonna have Nina Rains, design team project manager, Joel Tillery, design team technical lead, and Andrew Doyle, landscape architect with Bachelor, and of course, Atiana Cordova with Water Black. She's the community engagement lead for the project. And we're gonna cover these few topics tonight. One of them is project overview. We're gonna go over community-based design, project design review, next steps, bidding and construction, and continue community building. So without further ado, the project summary and review will be given by Nina Rains. Nina?
Yeah. Thank you, Lisbeth, and thanks everybody for joining tonight. I was very excited to present to you everything we've developed through this final design, and I want to thank everybody who has gotten us to this point. Some of these slides might look familiar. I know some folks are new, but most people have seen others. So just move to the next slide. The site that we're talking about is highlighted here. It's kind of right abutting the London Avenue Canal, a Dillard campus, and not too far from the lake and City Park. Next slide, please. A little zoom in. You can see this project site has been a forest for a long time, and was made part of the Gentilly Resilience District project portfolio, and became the Dillard Wetlands project. Next slide. This is kind of a condition that kind of shows the location real well. It's kind of embedded next to a neighborhood. We've kind of tried to keep engaged with the residents since the inception, as well as the Dillard University, the London Avenue Canal, and Orleans Parish School Board property, where you see the temporary structures that were there post-Katrina. The main goals are managing urban water, restoring ecology by removing invasive species and restoring local species, and providing access to the site for use for recreational, health, and educational opportunities. And we'll go into those a little bit more in detail on what that looks like during our final design. Next slide. with that, I'll give it over to Tatiana Cordova's water block to really show kind of what have we heard and how has that been incorporated into the design. Tatiana?
Thanks, Nina. So good evening, everyone. As shared, my name is Tatiana Cordova, and I'm the founder of Waterblock, and we've been leading the community outreach as part of the design team for this project. So in the beginning of the project, within our company ourselves, we have our framework of listen, learn, envision, and co-create, which is how we approach any community-based design project. And through that lens, we held a series of different events with local stakeholders and residents to, one, educate them about the project, but also to gather input to drive the design decisions. Some of those activities included stakeholder meetings dating back to October 2020, some neighborhood canvassing events to identify local leaders and to get just initial concerns about the project or desires for the project. We also held community leader virtual forums between November and February of 2020. We held pop-up events. So once again, trying to think of different ways to have touch points for stakeholders to engage, especially during this time of COVID and during the pandemic. We rolled through the 30% RDRC meeting. We also held coordination meetings with just a larger group of stakeholders who will be influencing the project and programming in the future. We held in-person community meetings. We did presentations. We held, once again, rolled through the 60% RDRC meeting as well. We held some more community meetings to provide updates on how the design decisions were being determined based on the community feedback gathered. We held an educator roundtable back in November, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on in the presentation. And we also did neighborhood canvassing and surveying up until this point. And now we're at the 90% RDRC meeting. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So out of the engagement and at the initial point of outreach, the theme of remember and reclaim was something that resonated. And this was really aimed at trying to highlight the historical significance of this site, being that it is one of the last undeveloped pieces of land within city limits. This theme also pays homage to the originating name of New Orleans as Bobancha, which was identified by the indigenous people, and also just the sacredness of this land to the indigenous people, but also to the Maroons, who are those who were basically freed themselves from enslavement to create their own settlements and their own ideas of what freedom was. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So as noted, some of our most recent engagements included our virtual community meeting, which was held on November 4th of 2021. And during this meeting, it was really to update residents on advancements that have been happening with the design process itself and to gather concerns around the access points and safety measures surrounding the site, which was some major topics that residents expressed concerns about. Next slide, please. We also held our virtual educator roundtable on November 18th. And this educator roundtable was really great because, one, we had an impressive and diverse group of educators join us from informal and formal teaching conditions, but also traditional and non-traditional backgrounds. So these included like high school teachers from New Harmony. We had edible schoolyard representation. We have the NOLA Nature School. We also had some housing alliances present as well, like the Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance, and some also homeschooling schools present too. So it was just a great mix of educators from different backgrounds who were able just to come to the table with ideas for future programming for this site, and to also, most importantly, discuss what are some barriers or challenges that may prevent them from using the site in the future. So we were grateful to have them in that space, and we look forward to seeing how their input is going to be talked about and gathered in the future steps for the project. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So our latest and last outreach activity that we've done to date included our neighborhood canvassing and surveying, which took place between December 2021 and January 2022. So with this event, well, series of events, it took place in 3 different parts. So we had digital mailers that we sent, physical mailers that we mailed out. We had a digital survey, and we also had canvassing within the immediate neighborhood. And with this event, it really was to follow up on that community meeting that we held in early November, where there was many concerns around the safety measures around the site and the exact boundaries and how those options would look. So we want to follow up and make sure that we acknowledge what those concerns were from that meeting, but also to provide a way for residents to continue to give us feedback on what they want to see in the final design. So that was just a way for us to connect in our latest outreach event. Next slide, please. And we'll hear more about the next steps for outreach and how the community's feedback has been incorporated. But now I'm going to hand it back to Joel Tillery and Andrew Doyle, will be talking about the project design review.
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you, Atiana. I'm going to be talking specifically about, give kind of a brief overview of the project elements to start with, and then I want to delve into the managing urban water component, one of the the key features of the project site. I'll talk a little bit about the ecological restoration components, and then I'll turn it over to Andrew to talk about some of the site design elements. So just as a quick overview of the project elements, you see on the slide here, we have an access road, and you can kind of click through these. Elizabeth, drainage infrastructure and a stormwater pump station and building. We have vehicular bus and bicycle parking, nature playground, buffers and site perimeter, walking trails and boardwalks throughout the project site, observation areas for wildlife, and seating areas for reflection, outdoor classroom spaces for nature-based education, and a shade structure that's integrated with a boardwalk that goes over an open water area, as you see there in location number 9. Next slide. So managing urban water. We've talked about this with you all before. This is an overview of the system. We are pulling water from Pratt Drive and Virgil Boulevard and bringing it into the wetland site through 2 diversion structures. One you see at location number 1, which is Pratt Drive, and then the other on Virgil Boulevard. Those 2 diversions lead to drainage infrastructure that comes into a conveyance and storage system consisting of pipes and box culverts. That leads to a pump station, which then lifts water into the wetland at a primary discharge location. And then that pond area, the open water area where the water will stage up, eventually will drain back out into the city's drainage network. Next slide. These are detailed plan and profile drawings that are in the package that was submitted to the RDRC. And starting just from left to right, this is beginning at the diversion from Pratt Drive. I see we've adapted a sewage and water board kind of standard junction box to intercept a 36-inch RCPA. That line is actually going in as part of the reconstruction of Pratt Drive through the JIRR program. That pipe will lead into, like I said, a junction box, which will then be diverted to a 60-inch RCPA. One of the questions that's come up is how that water will be diverted. That 60-inch RCPA sits a little bit above the invert of the main 36-inch RCPA that runs along Pratt Drive. So, small base flows, kind of normal drainage, small rain events will pass through the system. And it's not until you have a larger rain event and it stages up past that point that water will begin to be diverted to the 60-inch RCPA. That leads into a 6x12 box culvert, which then flows, and if you can click through here, Elizabeth. Flows downstream until it gets to the pump station. Let's see the pump station here in a little bit more in a second. You can go on, Elizabeth. Back up just one slide, Elizabeth. Can talk a little bit about a couple of these elements. Maybe 2 more back. Okay, and so this is the location of the outfall structure from the pond. It picks up with an outlet control structure, which manages the water at a normal water surface elevation. That water flows when the pond stages up or the site stages up with water. It will overflow into this structure and then back out towards the city's drainage network along Pratt Drive. You can click 1. Along the way, we are going to be picking up some existing drainage that is on the Orleans Parish School Board site. So basically, there are some existing storm drains there that flow back out to Pratt. We are going to be demoing and removing those as part of this project, but we want to make sure that those are reconnected to the system that we're installing. So there's a couple of locations where we're going to be tying in that existing drainage to this 24-inch RCP. That's the discharge line from the pond. Next slide. And eventually that water will get back to Pratt Drive, where it will continue downstream to drainage pump station number 4. Next slide. So a little bit about the stormwater pump station. The location of it is there in the highlighted yellow. A couple of features here to look at in plan view. There will be situated between the main access road that leads into the project site and a boardwalk and trail system located on the, actually that will be the west side of the project site. Looking north is actually to the east, kind of back towards the London Avenue Canal. But you can see the pump station is situated kind of equal distance between the access road and the trail system. We have a access drive or maintenance access drive that comes into the backside of the pump station. And you can see where that pump station discharges back to the south, and then takes a left-hand turn, crosses underneath the access drive, and then discharges into the pond. Next slide. This is a profile view of the discharge line from the stormwater pump station. We've got 3 16-inch force mains that will discharge, and through underneath that access road, we're going to put those in steel casing. So if there ever is any settlement or concern with the road on the access road, that piping, the force mains would be protected. We're also going to be running some other infrastructure through the casing. There's an aeration system that we're going to be installing in some of the open water areas, and those pipes that will service that, the aeration system will be run in the annular space inside that casing. And you can see how that force main crosses over the 30-inch RCP that comes from Virgil Boulevard. Next slide. This is a rendering that we created for the pump building. We spent a good bit of time coming up with some concepts, and this is not a key feature of the project site, but it's a utilitarian building. It's something that was needed to protect the pump station and provide for maintenance access. It is a CMU block building. It will be screened on a couple of sides with vegetation. And what you see here is there's an opportunity on one of the faces, actually the north side of the building, for an artist or local artist to come in and do some sort of mural. So that that's the space that's available for future embellishment, and something we wanted to create, kind of like a lot of the elements of the project, further opportunities and future enhancements as the project goes forward. Next slide. And this is another view of it looking to the northeast, where the access road comes in. You have double doors and location for equipment to come in and out. Just some details. You guys have seen these in the plan set, plan view or floor plan. We've got access hatches and grading, some equipment that's going to be within the building, double doors to access, and a rail crane to be able to lift those pumps out for maintenance. And then the section view that you see there on the right, it's a fairly deep wet well. We're tying into the city's drainage system, which is already fairly low. But that system again will lift that water up and bring it into the wetland area. Next slide. All right, so transitioning to the ecological restoration. There's not a lot new to report here since the 60% design. The elements of the ecological restoration are primarily to remove the invasive species, do some selective site clearing for the construction of the site design, mowing and debris removal, particularly in the corridor between the private residences that abut the site, where there's been some historical dumping over the years. Next slide. And then once all the grading work and the site design, everything is installed, there'll be a zone-based planting plan. Various grading elements or elevations will establish different hydrologic zones, And those will be planted with appropriate vegetation, depending on how frequently those areas will be inundated. So it kind of transitions from, low-lying swamp area that's primarily, mostly wet all the time, to areas that are less flooded. In this graphic is kind of noted as temporarily flooded, but you can kind of see the transition from an upland area to deeper area or lower areas within a bottomland hardwood forest. That's the type of ecosystem that we're trying to mimic here. Next slide. These are just showing some of the zones. You can keep going, Elizabeth. These are just showing some of the zones that are based on the grading plan that we've prepared for the project site. And again, you guys have seen these slides before. We have various trees and shrubs and herbaceous vegetation that will be planted depending on the elevations on the project site. And those are based on, where those species naturally occur relative to their elevation and hydrologic condition. Next slide. Another element of the project site is water quality and mosquito control. We've been working with Mosquito, Termite, and Pest Control Board throughout the design of the project. They do have some existing research and monitoring stations on the site. So our site design accommodates those and make sure that those stay intact and undisturbed so that they can continue their research. One of the things that we worked with them on is that would help with mosquito control is making sure that we don't have any isolated ponds or isolated water areas that hold water. So the grading plan removes those isolated pools, kind of reconnects the system. And then within that normal water elevation or the ponded areas or areas that hold water permanently, there will be an aeration system to improve the water quality. That together with the city continuing their research and monitoring and treatment as necessary will keep the mosquitoes under control there. Next slide. With that, I'll turn it over to Andrew Doyle.
Hey all, I'm going to go over some of the specifics of the site design itself. You can go ahead, Elizabeth, to the next slide. So this is kind of an overview of how we've laid out the sheets on the construction set. Just to give you an idea, we're going to zoom in on a specific kind of quadrant within this grid, but because of the size of the site, we kind of had to break it up into smaller pieces so that the scale would be legible. So go ahead. So this is an enlargement of the plan rendering from 60%. You can see that there's some crossings, trail networks. The grading was, kind of underway at that point, and we've finalized that since then. So this is kind of like a good snapshot of what 60% looked like. And if you go ahead to the next slide, you'll see an example of how we've progressed the design since then. So this is an example of the clearing plan. Just kind of articulating, you can see the hatches that correspond to where earthwork will occur, and then the trail itself. So as Joel mentioned, there'll be clearing done to kind of facilitate that construction. Go on to the next slide. This is an example of the grading plan. So we're trying our best to balance cut and fill, and we're pretty close right now, but basically the overall goal is to create these different zones that will match the ecological types through planting as a means of managing stormwater and pulling stuff in from the surrounding neighborhood and circulating water through the wetland site. In the bottom right corner of this sheet, you'll see that berm. This was a key element to the design. It effectively acts as a levee that prevents water that we pull into the site from going to surrounding properties. And it's graded up to about +1, with the bottom of the wetland system being around -8 for reference. So we're cutting down about 4 feet in some areas and raising up about 4 feet in other areas. Next slide, please. This is an example of what we're calling our site plan, but essentially this shows kind of like the interactive pieces of the site that a user might actually like. For example, the trails the alignments are shown, the boardwalks where we cross over the wetlands. Since 60%, we've really honed in the trail alignment, material, the width of them, as well as things like park benches and trash receptacles and different amenities like that. Next slide, please. This is a reforestation plan. So we'll have two separate series of drawings and strategies as far as vegetation goes. This one is more of a broad stroke where we're going to be thinking about ecology and plant communities. And we're using hatches and planting schedules to kind of articulate different species that would be within each zone, which again correspond to the hydrology of the site. And then we'll have a separate series, if you go to the next slide, please, that we're calling our planting plans. And these are highly detailed planting design sheets. And this effort is largely centered around the programmatic spaces of the site, so closer to the northern end and the access points. We're going to have very detailed containerized planting designs where we're using larger specimen and spending a little bit more of our budget to kind of beef up the planting design in spaces that people will spend a lot of time, particularly around the nature playground and the arrival sequence. And the planting species that we use are not only native, so they're naturalized to our climate, but we also carefully selected them because of their cultural significance. A lot of the species used were utilized by Maroons when they were surviving in the existing swamps where the site still lies. So there's not only an ecological tie-in for the planting design, but there's a cultural significance to the species we're using as well. Next slide, please. So we talked a little bit about perimeter and site security, and this has been a key theme for the entirety of the project. And in order to facilitate and actually what these things look like, we produced a series of graphics and did some surveys. And you'll see here the pie chart show that residents responded and were in favor of a metal fence. The thumbnail image at the top right there, we had a number of different finials that they could choose from, which is the top of the actual fence and the design of the panel itself. So that shows kind of their preference there. And then there was also an option to have a hedge behind the fence or not. Didn't mention this when we were looking at the planting plans, but the hedge was in the favorable condition, so that was showing up on the planting plans as well. So that rendering at the bottom left kind of illustrates how we're having this layered effect at the property boundary of the site to kind of provide separation from the adjacent residential properties. Next slide, please. So this kind of articulates in plan view what's going on from a site access perspective. So we'll have kind of our primary access point on Pratt Drive, and then secondary public access points on Van and Rain Drive. And the multi-use path kind of follows those red arrows, which will double as our emergency access route. And then the site will be surrounded on three sides, basically kind of does some interesting jogging around Pratt, but essentially on three sides, it'll be contained within the metal fence that we were showing in the previous renderings, and that image at the bottom right kind of shows exactly how that would look. And then on the levee side, we'll have a chain link fence that is either black or green, depending on what our final decision on color is, but it will be kind of like a vinyl coated stainless steel chain link fence. Next slide, please. And this is an enlargement of that rendering we were looking at on the previous slide, just to give you a better view of what that would look like. Very conceptual rendering, but you get the idea that it kind of creates that opaque boundary line between the public space and the park and the adjacent residential properties. So a little bit more about access roads. So we're using an access point off of Pratt Drive. We did quite a bit of study on exactly what the cross section of this access road might look like. And there was a lot of discussion early on about parking. And the consensus was to put the parking largely outside of the park space itself, and to put a precedent on ADA parking and bus access for the roundabout that's within the site. So this shows kind of just like a conceptual layout of the access route, and then a cross section of what that might look like with the multi-use path of note on the right side. So there's vehicular as well as pedestrian and bicycle access off of Pratt. And this pulled from our 90% package. So on the left is a detailed planting plan for the access point off of Pratt. And on the right is, I think that's one of our reforestation plans. But you'll see we're tying into, Joel mentioned, we're tying into the JIRR projects reconfiguration of Pratt. So we're reflecting that on our 90% plans as well. Next slide, please. This just kind of shows our trails and boardwalks in concept. We made like kind of a rough 3D model to show how the layout was working, to think about it in third dimension. Go ahead. And then this diagram illustrates our kind of three-tiered trail network. So working down from the most programmatic areas of the site where we have vehicular and emergency access, to the more passive areas of the site at the top right corner. So you're kind of going down in size for the trail, as well as the material is going to reflect the frequency of use. So we're going from like a paved trail to like a mulch trail, for example. Next slide, please. This is just some snippets of our details for the trails from our 90% set. Go ahead. And then we have key locations where we're crossing the wetland system, and we've developed a series of structural details and designs for boardwalks, as well as a shade structure on the major boardwalk near the deepest portion of the wetland system. Next slide, please. So this just kind of shows some more elements, such as a nature playground, which I mentioned, and then we have site furnishings kind of scattered throughout the project site. Next slide. And the nature playground, which is located just near our vehicular access point, or drop off rather. And this is going to be a really marquee moment in the site design, and we're working through details for customizing that for the site so that it reflects its cultural and ecological history. Next slide, please. These are just some details of the types of site furnishings we'll include in the project site. Go ahead. And then other elements such as the outdoor classroom space, which we're going to work with the contractor to kind of salvage some of the wood material that's cut down throughout the site to use that in the space, but it'll largely remain kind of a blank slate for local schools and youth groups to use the space for outdoor education. And then I mentioned the shade structure on the major boardwalk. That's located just near the stormwater outlet structure. So that offers a unique opportunity for interpretation and for educating the public on how the site actually functions from a stormwater perspective. Next slide, please. That's just a quick 3D rendering we did of the shade structure before developing 90% details to actually, see how it would be constructed, which I think is on the next slide. Yeah, so that's kind of our layout and framing plan for the shade structure itself, which is included in the drawing set. Next slide. And then this just kind of shows our intent for the outdoor classroom. As I mentioned, very passive and not overly programmed at this point. We're going to leave it open for people to kind of do what they want with the space moving forward. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Joel and Atiana at this point to cover next steps. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. You can go to the next slide, Elizabeth. Just want to briefly talk about our path forward after 90% upon approval from the RDRC. We'll be preparing for bidding and construction. We have a couple of elements to that, one of which is preparing an invitation to bid for the invasive removal and clearing. We decided as a team to break that element of the project out from the overall design to try to facilitate getting a specialized contractor that could really tackle that activity, and it would bring some expertise to the table. So not just a general contractor, but an arborist or someone that's a group that's experienced with removing invasive species and handling herbicides and things like that to provide a better product. Also, that would clear the way for a general contractor to come in and hit the ground running with the grading and constructing the various site elements. So we obviously, we're at 90%. We have to finalize construction plans. We have a draft set of specifications that we've submitted. There'll be some cross-referencing with together with the city's standard specs, DPW and Sewage and Water Board, and sort of general and front-end conditions. We've got a good start on that. This should be reflected in the set that you have. We'll finalize our opinion of probable construction cost and match that together with the construction budget. There will likely be some adjusting of quantities as we match the overall construction budget that's available for the site. There are a few easements and agreements that need to be finalized before going to construction, and the city's got those underway and in progress. There'll also be a draft operation and maintenance plan. Part of the contract will be for a contractor to take responsibility for O&M for the first 3 years of the project site, and that'll be key to maintaining the site. And then establishing kind of the best practices for maintaining the site in the future. At that point, the city would take over the operation and maintenance of the site. And like I said, finalizing the construction plans, the specs, and the cost estimate, that'll all go into preparing a set of bid documents that can be put out on the street for bidding. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Atiana. Atiana.
Thanks, Joel. So now we're just talking about the next steps for the community part of the project and how that's going to be incorporated going forward. So as you can see, we have a general timeline of where we started, which was October 2020 with our initial engagement efforts, and going all the way until when construction starts in September 2022. So some of the overall goals for this entire community-based design process has been to ensure that the community desires and concerns have been driving the entire design process. So that's why in the earlier parts of the presentation, we were just showing you the different ways in which we really worked to make sure we had a touch point with a range of different stakeholders. Although we are in this pandemic and COVID state right now, it was important to us that we had a variety of different methods to reach people and just ensure that that wasn't a barrier for people to give their input or their desires for the project. Another goal was to just strengthen like the local partnerships and to build trust and social capital with stakeholders and local leaders, and to facilitate social connections and foster community ownership, and just to create a safe and usable space for the community as well. Next slide, please. You can go to the next slide. And part of those next steps, what they actually look like. So one, collaborating with the city's selected consultant to determine the branding identity for the project, including signage, and how that plays within the greater Gentilly Resilience District network of projects. Another part of that next steps includes selecting a name for the project site. So this has always been a large part of our outreach process. and as a way to really create a sense of ownership by residents by allowing them to actually select the name and be a part of that naming process for this project as well. So we have held a few community events in the past, as mentioned before, to begin conversations around this topic and the importance of using that name once again to pay homage to the historical significance of the site. But we're excited to continue that conversation past 90%, pending acceptance of the 90% design set, and actually select the name as we near the end. Also, a part of those next steps includes continuing conversations around future programming. So as shared, we had a great conversation with a diverse range of educators, and we're excited to see how that information that we've gathered from them can be incorporated as far as a proposal or a plan for programming in the future for this site as well. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So our immediate activity that we have planned for the community is actually tomorrow. So this will be our virtual community meeting. So similar to today's meeting, we're going to be providing an overview of the community design process to date and how the feedback has been incorporated, but also the 90% design updates. And then we're going to also make additional progress on the naming of the site. So once again, getting in the mindset of how do we start to solidify the names based on what we've gathered so far with our past outreach events to actually decide what this site is going to be called. Because right now the name is a placeholder, but we love the community's input in selecting a final a final title for the site. And we invite you all to attend as well. Next slide, please. And now I'm going to hand it off to Mary, to go into the committee's questions and answers.
Thank you, Achana. I'd like to recognize the committee members and open up the floor for discussion and comment by the city. Representing the Office of Resilience, we have Joe Threat.
Hey, good evening, everyone. This is Joe Threat. I'm the Director of Project Delivery and Program Manager. Also, I'm proxy for my boss, who's the Deputy CAO for Infrastructure for the City of New Orleans. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Joe. Any comments for the team?
The only comments I posted one in chat, Mary. I'm just worried. Naturally, I'm the guy who's got the budget for maintenance costs for the city beyond that 3-year point. And I posted one question about the lifespan of the timber supports, for the wooden walking trail over water. And then my next question is, do we have any estimates beyond the 3 years of what the maintenance costs would look like for the project?
Joel, can you talk a little bit about how the O&M plan that you've put together addresses that?
So thank you for your questions, Joe. I think that points to some of the additional work that our team needs to do as we move beyond the 90%. We have a site plan, we have a cost estimate for construction, and the next step is to really prepare, based on what we have on the plans now, what we anticipate the O&M to be. Some of that will be a balancing act between the construction budget, what we want to build on site versus, what it takes for O&M. Obviously, timber, natural materials like wood are going to be more maintenance intensive as opposed to some sort of material like a Trex or fiberglass or more robust artificial materials. Those are some selections I think that we can refine and make decisions on as we go towards bidding. That said, I don't think any of the layout or the design necessarily would change. It would just be the selection of materials at this point. Andrew, I'll pass that over to you if you have any comments about the materials for the boardwalk.
Yeah, so most of the boardwalk structure that would be within or below the overflow elevation of the outlet would be steel. And I believe the walking surface of it is above that so that it would never be inundated unless the entire neighborhood was underwater. And then I think we're gonna have pine straw for the mulch trails so that in the event that those do get underwater, the mulch won't float and then migrate elsewhere on site. And then we'll use steel edging as the edge to kind of hold that in place, you know, for the most part.
Okay, thank you, folks.
Mhm.
Thanks, Joe. For the City Planning Commission, we have Aspen Nero. Aspen, do you have any comments or questions for the design team?
Yeah, I just made a comment on parking. How many spaces are you guys providing, and how are you guys determining the spaces? Are you guys doing it on like a projection of how many people you plan to use the space at any given time? Because it looks like if all the parking's on the exterior, are people going to end up also parking in the neighborhood?
We have some parking spots along the access route. Joel, do you know the exact number?
Yeah, I was just gonna pull up the.
Yeah, if you wanna-
plans here. Didn't find that.
So yeah, so there's the, like there was a lot of discussion early on around like parking and, you know, kind of, you know, what the preferences were and, you know, kind of one of the comments initially was the reason we created kind of a roundabout so that the access is the entry and exit way towards Pratt Drive to avoid, you know, additional parking in the neighborhood, making that the main access and having additional parking there, but also not, you know, too much parking. That was kind of another side of the request. So yeah, there was kind of a lot of back and forth in the thought there that resulted in the final layout, and then having Pratt Drive with the you know, being a one-way and offering additional parking is definitely beneficial there, but it's not the only parking.
So just to follow up on that, there we have 20 spaces that are located along the access road. And then 3 handicap spaces within the project footprint itself or within the city property itself. And just a note, the access road is through Orleans Parish School Board property. It's actually where some buses used to park. If you look at the old images that we presented earlier tonight. And then I don't know that we've mentioned it here in this call, but there is still an ongoing effort working with DPW to come in after the JRR project is complete and do a striping plan that would provide some bike lanes. And together with that would be some dedicated street parking so that any sort of overflow from the project site, if there were to be any, would be kind of located along that corridor. Particularly in front of the Orleans Parish School Board property, which is currently vacant. And then any future parking concerns, you know, there is a concept to, you all maybe have heard of it or familiar with it, but to kind of a dedicated entrance on the other side of London Avenue Canal and Parks and Parkways property. And there would be more parking available there. That's obviously sometime in the future. But as Nina said, we're trying to find the right balance between what is needed for the project site at the moment and balancing residents' concerns over having too much parking.
Thank you. That's all I have.
That seems like a good transition to move on to Michael Karam, representing the Department of Parks and Parkways.
Thanks, Mary. I don't have any questions or comments at this time. Just want to commend everybody on the excellent presentation and how excited we are at Parks and Parkways to see this project get underway and the expansion possibilities for it to cross the canal in the future.
Thank you, Michael. I'd like to recognize Stephen Yang representing Networks for Sewage and Water Board. Stephen, you put a question in the chat. Would you mind repeating it for the recording?
Yeah, no problem. I just making sure that the city is going to maintain the pump station, the trash receptacle, the trash screens, and the culvert leading to the site in the 3-year maintenance period that you mentioned. And also wanted to get your feedback on the 12 by 6 foot box. And it just seems like a little bit of an over design from just, looking at it quickly. because you're just pulling in from the 36 at Pratt in a couple spots within the site itself with 8-inch PVC. So just want to hear the thought process behind that. And then two other things I was going to put into the chat. One was the capacity gain from modifying the site from just landscaping to include retention ponds. And then is there any plans to include backup power to the pump stations in case the power does go out, so you can still have the increased capacity in that type of event?
Wow, there's a lot. So let's take that one at a time. Let's go with the culvert first.
Yeah, I can address that one. So that was Stephen that was asking the
Yes.
questions?
Yes, sir.
So yeah, Stephen, it was a bit of a balancing act between, obviously when it rains, there's, the system is very flashy. You get high flow rates, and then they pass through the system fairly quickly. What we're trying to accomplish with the box culvert is to be able to capture that water and serve as, basically storage in and of itself within the box culvert. And then the pump station can be sized a little bit smaller so that it meters that out over a longer period of time. Instead of having a really large pump station with large pumps, we could go with a smaller, slightly smaller pump station, and then use that box culvert essentially as a reservoir for the pump station. So that was the rationale there. It's kind of a balance between pumping capacity and storage.
Okay.
What was the next question?
Makes sense. The next question was about, go ahead, Mary.
Oh, I was just gonna say, there was a question about long-term maintenance of the pump. That's really not a question for the design team, but more, a concern to be noted by the city's project manager. That's part of ongoing future budget discussions with Joe and Ramsey. So that concern is noted. And then I think you had one more question after that.
Yeah, the backup power for the pump station was the third question, and then the last was how much more capacity are you gaining for the site from changing it from just being the way it is, a forest or just landscaping, to basically including retention ponds. I mean, I don't need an exact number, but a percentage increase if you have one.
Yeah, Stephen, you can't throw the numbers off the top of my head. We do have an H&H report that we prepared, and I can pass that your way. That kind of gets at, the additional storage that's created with the project site, and, reduction in flow rates and peak water surface elevations for various design storms.
I have a rough capacity number that I can provide. It's not H&H derived, but it's just like a flat volumetric calculation. It's about 1.7 million cubic feet.
And that's the new condition. Do we know roughly the existing condition?
Well, that's the additional storage created from existing.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
And beyond that, Stephen,
Yeah,
it's utilizing capacity that's underutilized now, because water doesn't naturally flow into the project site. So we're bringing a lot more water to the area that doesn't currently come to the site. So beyond just the capacity that's created, it's we're using existing capacity that's already there.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, and Stephen, on the hydrologic report, you should already have that, but Rodrigo will send you a fresh link just to make sure that you've got access to that.
Okay, appreciate it, Mary.
Great. I'd like to recognize Grace Vogel, representing Sewage and Water Board Environmental Affairs.
Hey, Mary. My questions were the same as Stephen's that we discussed earlier, so I'm good.
Great, thank you. So rounding out our committee members, we have Megan Williams from Department of Public Works.
Hey, Mary. I guess something to piggyback off of Stephen's question regarding the capacity is, if Rodrigo could send over the H&H report to me as well, I'd like to see what the overall flood reduction is. And I had a question about that 60-inch pipe that's kind of siphoning off from the 36-inch. Is that pipe flowing full coming off of Pratt Drive? Kind of similar to Steven's mindset that it does seem relatively large, but you know, if you're able to gain some storage there, I understand it. I'm just curious what the if that pipe is flowing full or 80%, something like that. I'm just curious to know.
Yeah, it's been a little while since we've gone through those calculations, Megan. I can pull up the swim model and look at the hydraulic profile through that. As I recall, the water was staging up at least at the top of that 60-inch RCPA. You know, the water comes up pretty high within the city's system there. Mm-hmm. So we were utilizing that as much as possible. You know, we thought about teeing in the 6x12 box culvert to the junction box, but that just created a little more complicated structure to have to build. Mm-hmm. And with the 60-inch RCPA, we can kind of use standard sewage and water bores, city standard details, you know, slightly modified to work with the system and kind of reduce the size of those boxes in the street and save some cost. So there was a rhyme and reason to selecting that 60-inch RCPA. And in the H&H port report, when you get it, we do have, you know, results of, you know, various design storms showing the reductions between like a 2-year, 10-year, 25-year storm event.
Okay, that makes sense. And then in regards to maintenance, and I'd like to work closely with you guys to develop this as it'll tie into the larger comprehensive maintenance plan for the city. Something to consider is outlining what maintenance is actually required by the contractor during construction. I'm speaking from experience that it's great to say that, you know, it's on the contractor during construction and for the 3 years after, but if we don't have that outlined during construction, it'll be hard to keep an eye on that and kind of hold their feet to the fire. So we need to think through what that would actually look like from the contractor's perspective of what they'll be responsible for. And then we need to standardize some of the bid item numbers. Just in the quick screen grab that you showed, I don't know if that's just an internal sort of layout that you guys have, or if that's what you're preparing for bid, but we'll need to standardize some of those item numbers, and I can work with you guys to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. We look forward to working with you. We've got a draft bid schedule, and we can tweak that and update it, consolidate elements, or break them out as needed. So yeah, look forward to working with you.
That's all I've got. Great job, guys. I'm looking forward to this one.
Great, thank you, Megan. I'd also like to recognize the Larry Barabino and Edgar Alexis from North Sea that are on the call, and that department has been a great partner on this project. So Larry, do you have any comments or questions for the design team?
Hey, yeah, good night, everyone. I did ask one question on the comment box. I asked about the wood chips that I saw by the rope structure, play structure, as it relates to who's going to maintain that. We have challenges in the city with those kind of wood chips. Of course, they have to be turn monitored to look for foreign and unwanted objects. So who's going to monitor that? I'm assuming, will that be parks and parkways? Just a question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
I can take that one as far as just as far as the playground and the surfacing on the playground, that's still a detail that we're working through, Larry, and we're actually entertaining some port in place material so that there really wouldn't be as significant of a maintenance issue that you might see with wood chips. We're like Andrew mentioned it earlier, we're working on the details of that, but we are expecting that to be port in place. Yeah, I guess if for budget reasons we have to go with wood chips, then I'll defer to Mary. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just wanted to put that out first before we continue the discussion with the wood chips.
Okay, yeah, because port in place is really the standard that we use in the city. 'Cause it's easy for us to spot any foreign objects that's laying on the surface. Of course, it's easier to maintain, less maintenance that's required.
Right, right.
Thank
Yeah, there's
you, guys.
a
I
lot
was
of
just gonna
details
make
that
the
go
same,
into. I'm sorry, Mary, go ahead.
I was just gonna make the same comment I made before. Rodrigo, if you could make a note to send the full deliverable set to Edgar and Larry, so we can capture these comments, these operational issues through that process as well.
And Larry and Edgar, the details of the playground are not in the current set that we have. That's something that's going to be added between 90 and 100%.
Okay.
And we can get with you separately and share that, design once it's completed. We'll share that with you.
Edgar, do you have any comments or questions for the committee?
No, I don't. I had kind of the same question concerns Larry had about the wood chips, but real impressive presentation, y'all. Great work. Love to see it come to fruition, and keep the streets from flooding. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Edgar. I'd like to ask the committee at this time if they would like to hear from the public comment before they move on to moving the project to the next stage. So can I ask for a voice vote of the committee members? Would you like to hear from the public comment before you move on? Ayes?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any nays? Okay, so I'm going to read the comments from the public that are in the chat, and then Elizabeth's going to assist with having people ask questions via call-in. The first question that we have: from the discussion of some areas of the wetland that is higher elevation, is the underground gradation lines have consideration of overtime settling of foundation and connections of the conduit when in a pressurized vessel mode in a high storm situation? Joel?
Mary, can you read the question again?
From the discussion of some areas that are higher elevation, for the underground gradation lines, has there been consideration of overtime settling of the foundation and connections of the conduits in terms of how that would perform in a high storm situation? That's the question.
Okay.
Do you anticipate that any of those connections could come loose or be broken apart by differential settlement or come loose in a high frequency storm? Yeah.
Right. I guess there's a couple of things there. Settlement would be at play if the weight of the storm pipes is greater than the existing soil that's sitting there currently, and based on the size and the volume and the air spaces within those pipes, we don't expect there to be an additional load. Together with the trench preparations that are done for the installation of those pipes, and there's not additional load relative to existing conditions, then we don't expect a lot of settlement. That's obviously a construction consideration and construction quality in terms of how the trenches are prepared. That'll all be stuff that's monitored and observed during construction to minimize that as much as possible. With respect to like other features on the site, like the building or the boardwalks or the shade structure that are, applying additional loads, those will all be pile supported to address that issue of settlement and potential differential settlement. There are things with the pump station that we're doing in terms of mechanical joints to allow certain amounts of differential settlement to occur where it doesn't become an issue, or that things can be adjusted if it occurs, you know, beyond a certain point. So great technical questions, and you know, all good things to consider from an engineering perspective.
Okay, next question. Was shrub placement included in the security considerations of the community, along with fencing, trail circuitousness, and tree density? So can you go into discussion about can you talk a little bit about the community engagement that you had, you know, with what you were calling the natural barrier option that had to do with shrub placement on the periphery?
Yeah, Andrew, do you want to touch on that one?
Sure. So one of our first public meetings we had prior to like 30%, residents were concerned about the proximity of the trail network to their backyards, which raised the question of whether or not we're going to put in a fence. So we explored the option of doing just a naturalized buffer, using rain gardens and vegetation to separate the public space from the back of the residential properties, and floated that option out, and residents still were interested in having a fence. So we landed on basically a combination of having kind of like a nicer looking fence, which is how we ended up with the metal fence that's like vertical pickets. A combination of that as well as evergreen vegetation. So there'll be a hedge located right beyond the fence from the residential side. And then beyond the hedge will be kind of like a rain garden bioswale feature that will be planted with like 3-foot high native plants. And beyond that is a berm that contains the stormwater within the project site, but will also be another layer of vegetation. And that berm kind of occurs about 75 feet from the property boundary. So we have this kind of like layered system that goes from the trail, which is within the berm, a bioswale, a hedge, and then a fence. So there's quite a few pieces going into the perimeter of the site that create this kind of like transition from public space to the property boundary at the private property. Hopefully that was thorough enough.
Thank you, Andrew. Next question, does the plan for the park include a bathroom?
I can take that on. We had, you know, at the beginning, there was a discussion kind of similar, like, you know, the bathroom conversation kept kind of coming up, and but there was also a big concern by the community if a bathroom was provided, you know, what that potential hassle that could bring to the community or the misuse of a bathroom. So at this stage, we have not included a bathroom there for those reasons, especially with kind of the kind of excitement of a potential future phase of having, you know, like kind of more a bigger entrance, or maybe an entrance building on the other side of the canal in a future phase that could, you know, have that dual purpose of providing a safe, you know, bathroom in a more in a bigger entry setting, further away from the residents on this side of the park. So it kind of was a little bit of a learning curve there as well, similar to, you know, what happened with the fence. We heard one thing, we explored the options, and figured out what's kind of the best way. And at this point, the best way was to move forward without a bathroom.
Thank you, Nina. We have just a few more questions in the chat. If anyone has to jump off of the call before the end, if any members of the public have to jump off the call before the end, just be mindful that we do have a public meeting tomorrow as well. 3-part question in regards to security. Is the design project team concerned with the drug distribution house that's located right next to the main entrance of the park? Have FBI and local police been made aware that community will have easy access to the site? Is local police collaborating with providing security in the area? And I will answer that question, that we appreciate you making us aware of these concerns, and we certainly will coordinate that with NOPD. And then the last of the three-part questions, will there be a time for park opening and closing, or will the park be open 24 hours a day? Nina, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, so the main thing was to have it kind of be a daylight park, and there will be, the gate will be closed at night.
Great, thank you, Nina. And then our last question from the public, is there a risk matrix of key design features, goals, and maintenance considerations? What is the design life of the pump? What is the design life of the pump and culvert system infrastructure and any life cycle decommissioning plans?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, there will be a draft operation and maintenance plan that will include, the costs for maintenance that we would envision. I mean, typical design life, I think, for a system like this, 25 to 50 years, probably more on the 25 year. We haven't considered, decommissioning costs associated with this in our, our life cycle cost estimates. We've come up with a capital construction budget, and those are good considerations for as we move forward with the operation and maintenance planning and cost estimates associated with that. I don't know, Mary, if you want to add anything else to that.
No, those, like you said, those discussions are ongoing, but they definitely were a part of options that were considered during design. I apologize, there is one more question in the chat. How does the project situate in the drainage watershed, and approximately where are you seeing flooding reductions adjacent? Approximately where are flooding reductions in adjacent streets expected? And I think you talked a little bit about how much storage you're doing and how much flooding reduction you're seeing. Will those be some graphics that people can see at your public meeting tomorrow in greater detail?
We don't have that drawing in there, but I know that in previous presentations that we had given that are recorded on the website, we had slides that kind of show the difference in flooding. But we can definitely make an effort to include that slide in tomorrow's meeting presentation.
Great. And if anyone wants to see those past presentations, you can go to NOLA.gov/resilience and then navigate to the Dillard Wetlands Project from the menu on the left.
Elizabeth, you want to go to the next slide? That has all the website and everything on it. So
thank you. I was going to say I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth to see if there are any further questions from the public, and then we'll take a vote of the committee.
Thank you, Mary. Are there any other questions from the public? I don't see, well, there are no more on the chats. On the chat, there is nothing else. Does anyone in the public wants to unmute and ask a question? Okay. I think you can move forward, Mary.
Great, thank you so much. And if anyone does feel that their question wasn't answered in sufficient detail, just keep in mind we do have a meeting specifically geared for the public tomorrow. So I'd like to now take a vote of the committee members. Can I have a motion to approve this project to move to the final design stage on the condition that comments heard tonight are incorporated into the design?
I'll motion.
I'll second.
Thank you. Thank you. So can I get sorry. So can I get a vote, all of those saying aye?
Aye.
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 Nays? Do we have any nays? Hearing none, the motion is carried. and this committee has approved the project to move forward to the final design phase. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you to the members of the committee. So right now, if everyone can just mute themselves, just really quick. We're almost done. We're almost done. So the city of New Orleans have the Sleep Lab campaign, the Sleep Lab NORA campaign, and is the COVID-19 vaccines are shot to get back to normal. So to get some more information about where to get the COVID-19 vaccine or booster shot, the locations, you can visit ready.nola.gov for more information. So with that being said, that's the end of the presentation for tonight. So thank you so much to the members of the public for joining us this evening. Also, thank you to the members of the Resilience Society Review Committee and to the designee that attended this meeting as well. And thank you so much to the design team and the city team. We really appreciate your time, and y'all have a wonderful evening. And tomorrow we continue to keep on working. And as Mary stated, tomorrow we have the community meeting. So please, all the members of the public on this call, you can join us tomorrow, and we're going to go into more in-depth talk about the naming for the project, and we're going to go over the design, the 90% design plans with you, and of course the survey results in a little bit of more detail. So we appreciate you, and y'all have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.